Number 1. Brian Christopher Laundrie. On September 11th, 2021, a missing persons report was filed with Suffolk County Police in New York. The person reported missing was 22-year-old Gabrielle Petito. What made the report procedurally unusual from the start was a detail investigators confirmed almost immediately. The man she had been traveling with had already returned home. He had arrived back in Northport, Florida 10 days earlier, driving the van the two had shared for months. He was alone. He said nothing to law enforcement. The case was opened. Brian Christopher Laundrie was born in 1997 and grew up on Long Island, New York, where he and Petito attended the same high school. By the time they began dating in 2019, Laundrie was described by those around him as quiet and introverted, with a strong interest in outdoor activities and travel. The couple relocated to Northport, Florida, to live with his parents after roughly 9 months together. Friends of Petito later noted that Laundrie's behavior toward her had become increasingly controlling during this period. Text records later reviewed by investigators showed documented instances of possessiveness, including an alleged incident in which he took her wallet and identification to prevent her from going out independently. To those outside the relationship, the couple projected an image built around adventure and shared travel content posted to social media. That public image became central to the investigation that followed. On July 2, 2021, Petito and Laundrie departed New York in a converted Ford Transit van, beginning a planned 4-month journey through the national parks of the American West. The trip was documented in real time across Instagram and YouTube. On August 12th, a 911 caller in Moab, Utah, reported witnessing a physical altercation between a man and woman near a white van outside a local business. Officers from the Moab City Police Department responded and conducted a traffic stop. Petito was found visibly distressed in the passenger seat. No arrests were made, and the incident was not classified as domestic violence in the initial report. It was later reviewed and found to have been mishandled procedurally. Petito's last confirmed contact with her family occurred between August 24th and August 30th. On September 1st, Laundrie arrived back at the family home in Northport without her, and investigators later determined that text messages sent from Petito's phone after her last known contact had been manufactured to suggest she was still alive. Petito's family filed the missing persons report on September 11th, after days without contact. Northport police immediately noted the procedural irregularity of Laundrie's return and began surveillance of the family home. Laundrie declined to speak with investigators and communicated only through a family attorney. On September 13th, surveillance confirmed Laundrie leaving the residence. 4 days later, his parents reported him missing, telling police they had not seen him since he left for a hike. Investigators later confirmed they had mistakenly identified Laundrie's mother as Laundrie himself on September 15th, a critical surveillance error. On September 19th, search teams located human remains at the Spread Creek dispersed camping area in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest, near where the couple had last been seen together. The Teton County coroner subsequently confirmed the remains were those of Gabby Petito and determined her cause of death as blunt force injuries to the head and neck combined with manual strangulation. The manner of death was ruled homicide. A federal arrest warrant was issued for Laundrie on September 22nd, initially on charges of unauthorized use of a debit card. transactions linked to withdrawals made between August 30th and September 1st, using Petito's accounts during his solo return to Florida. An extensive search of the Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park in Florida was conducted over several weeks. The area had been partially submerged due to flooding, in which delayed the search significantly. On October 20th, 2021, after water levels receded and the park reopened, Longley's parents joined law enforcement at the site. That morning, a waterproof bag was located. Shortly afterward, human remains were found nearby. The remains were confirmed to belong to Brian Longley. A medical examiner determined the cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Found alongside the remains was a notebook. On January 21, 2022, the FBI confirmed the notebook contained written statements in which Longley claimed direct responsibility for Petito's death. The FBI's special agent in charge announced that all logical investigative steps had been concluded and that no other individuals were identified as directly involved. Because Longley died before charges related to Petito's homicide could be filed, no trial took place, and no criminal conviction was recorded in connection with her death. The federal indictment for unauthorized use of an access device was the only charge formally issued. In 2022, Petito's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Longley's estate, which was settled that same year for $3 million. A separate civil lawsuit against Longley's parents for intentional infliction of emotional distress was subsequently filed and settled in February 2024, with terms kept confidential. The FBI formally closed its criminal investigation in January 2022. A Netflix documentary series examining the case was released in February 2025. The Gabby Petito Act, signed into Florida law, it now requires law enforcement officers responding to domestic incidents to administer a formal lethality assessment, a procedural change directly tied to the events of August 12, 2021, in Moab. Number 2. Elliot Vincent Turner. The call to emergency services came in at 9:45 on the morning of May 7, 2011, from a residential address in the Queen's Park area of Bournemouth, Dorset. The caller reported an unresponsive young woman inside the property. Paramedics arrived to find 17-year-old Emily Longley deceased in an upstairs bedroom. The initial account offered at the scene described an accidental overnight incident. Responding officers noted the explanation was inconsistent with what they observed, and the case was immediately flagged for further investigation. Elliot Vincent Turner was 20 years old at the time and the son of a well-known jeweler in the Bournemouth area. Born in Birmingham in 1991, he had relocated to the South Coast with his family at the age of 9 when his father took ownership of a jewelry business. Turner had briefly enrolled at Southampton Solent University, but left within his first term, returning to Bournemouth, where he occupied a social circle of affluent young men, known locally as the Firm. Acquaintances described him by the nickname All Talk Turner, a reference to his persistent boasting about wealth and lifestyle. He worked part-time in his father's shop, while spending the majority of his time in the bars and clubs of Bournemouth and Poole. Prior to the events of May 2011, Turner had received a formal harassment warning from police in January 2008, following a complaint from an ex-girlfriend about being bombarded with repeated messages after their relationship ended. Emily Longley was a 17-year-old originally from Bournemouth, who had emigrated to Auckland, New Zealand. with her family at the age of 9. She returned to England in late 2010 to live with her grandparents in Southbourne and enroll at Brockenhurst College in Hampshire, where she was studying for a business diploma. She also worked part-time at a retail outlet in Bournemouth and had signed with a local modeling agency. The two met in December 2010. The relationship escalated quickly but became volatile within weeks. Friends and witnesses later told investigators that Turner displayed persistent jealousy throughout the relationship and that arguments were frequent and intense. In April 2011, Turner became aware of photographs on social media showing Emily socializing with other men during a visit to New Zealand to see her family. The conflict between them intensified significantly after her return. On the evening of May 6, 2011, Emily went to the Turner family home, where she and Turner had been arguing. According to prosecutors, a serious physical altercation took place in the bedroom that night. The following morning, Anita Turner sent a text message to her husband reading, "Come home. Emily's dead." More than 40 minutes passed before anyone at the address contacted emergency services. When police arrived and began questioning Turner, he stated that Emily had attacked him and that he had held her briefly by the throat in self-defense for a matter of seconds before going to sleep, only to find her unresponsive in the morning. Investigators assessed this account as implausible. A forensic pathologist confirmed the cause of death as manual strangulation. Traces of Turner's blood and tissue were recovered from beneath Emily's fingernails. Despite this, the initial post-mortem returned an inconclusive finding on the mechanism of death, which presented a challenge for prosecutors in establishing cause. Turner was bailed and returned to his normal lifestyle. Officers, however, continued building their case. A computer seized from the Turner home during this period was found to contain search queries, including the phrases "death by strangulation" and "how to get out of being charged for murder." Investigators then applied for and were granted authorization to place a covert listening device inside the property. On May 18, 2011, audio captured through that device recorded a conversation in which Turner stated he had just flipped out and grabbed Emily. The same recording captured his parents discussing the actions they had taken after the incident, including the destruction of a written confession letter and the removal of physical evidence from the scene. All three members of the family were arrested in July 2011. Turner was charged with murder. His parents, Lee and Anita Turner, were charged with perverting the course of justice, where the trial opened at Winchester Crown Court on April 10, 2012. Crown Prosecutor Tim Moosley presented the jury with a case built on forensic evidence, digital records, the covert audio recording, and testimony from friends of Emily who described the escalating pattern of controlling behavior and threats throughout the relationship. Witnesses confirmed that Turner had made repeated threats to harm Emily in the weeks before her death. The defense maintained that Turner acted in self-defense and that any physical contact was brief and unintentional. They also challenged the legality of the covert recording, arguing it had been unlawfully obtained. Prosecutors countered that all authorizations had been followed correctly and that the recorded statements were admissible. After a 4-week trial and 9 hours of deliberation, and the jury returned a majority verdict of 10-2. Turner was found guilty of murder. His parents were convicted of perverting the course of justice by the same majority. On May 22, 2012, Turner was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years before he could be considered for parole. His parents each received custodial sentences of 27 months. Turner lodged an appeal in 2013, challenging both his conviction and the admissibility of the covert recording. The Court of Appeal dismissed the application and upheld the original findings. Turner remains in custody and will not be eligible to apply for parole before 2027 at the earliest. His parents were released after serving half of their sentences. The case prompted renewed discussion in the United Kingdom about the early identification of coercive and controlling behavior in relationships, as well as the obligations of those who become aware of serious violence and choose concealment over disclosure. Number 3. Michael Lane. On August 25, 2016, emergency services were called to a residential bungalow on Christory Road in Portslade, near Brighton, East Sussex. Inside, officers found 19-year-old Shauna Grice, deceased, in her bedroom. The room had been set alight. What transformed this from a scene investigation into a systemic review was what investigators uncovered in the months that followed. A documented trail of formal complaints stretching back 6 months, each one submitted by the victim herself to the same police force now standing in her home. Michael Lane was 27 years old at the time of the killing and had been known to Shauna Grice since they worked together at Brighton Fire Alarms in 2015. He had grown up in the Thornhill Rise area of Portslade and presented to most people as an ordinary member of the community. What was not publicly known at the time was the extent of his behavior toward women over the preceding decade. A domestic homicide review conducted after the killing identified that Lane had been the subject of complaints from at least 13 other women between 2006 and 2016, involving allegations ranging from controlling behavior and harassment to more serious accusations. Several of those complaints had never been formally investigated. Lane had also previously held a volunteer position with a youth organization, a role he had been allowed to resume after earlier concerns about his conduct were not pursued to a formal conclusion. Shauna Grice was 18 when she met Lane at work in 2015. The two entered a brief relationship, which she ended when his behavior became possessive. She returned to her previous boyfriend, Ashley Cook, a relationship that had begun during her school years. Following the breakup, Lane refused to accept that the connection between them had ended. On February 8, 2016, Grice made her first formal complaint to Sussex police, reporting that Lane was monitoring her movements, sending unwanted correspondence, and that a GPS tracking device had been fitted to her car without her knowledge or consent. The device transmitted real-time location data to his mobile phone each time the vehicle moved. Officers contacted Lane, who told them the two were still in a relationship and characterized Grice's concerns as a domestic misunderstanding. Investigators accepted his account. Rather than being assessed as a stalking victim, Grice was issued a fixed penalty notice of £90 for wasting police time. In March 2016, Lane confronted Grice at her home, pulling her hair and attempting to take her phone as she tried to flee. When police attended, the incident was again framed as a dispute between two people in an ongoing relationship. No protective action was taken. In July 2016, Grice reported that Lane had used a stolen key to enter her home and had stood in her bedroom watching her while she was in bed. Lane was issued a caution for theft of the key and advised to stay away. Days later, Grice reported further incidents of being followed. Officers notified her in writing that the case was closed and assessed as low risk. It was the last report she ever made. On August 23, 2016, Grice met Lane at a hotel in Hove and confirmed clearly that their relationship was permanently over. 2 days later, Lane entered her home while she was alone. He slashed her throat and set fire to her bedroom before leaving the scene. He was arrested the same day. The investigation that followed examined not only the events of August 25th, but the entire 6-month sequence of police contacts preceding the killing. Forensic work confirmed Lane's presence at the scene. Investigators also uncovered that Lane had told an acquaintance prior to the killing that Grice would pay for what she had done. A review of his history with Sussex police and other forces revealed the full scale of prior complaints against him, none of which had resulted in any formal record that would have flagged his risk level. The sentencing judge, Mr. Justice Green, delivered a direct assessment of the institutional failure at the heart of the case, stating that officers had jumped to conclusions, that Grice had been stereotyped, and that Lane had been left with the clear impression that police would not act against him regardless of what he did. The trial was held at Lewis Crown Court in 2017 and lasted 2 weeks. Lane admitted to stalking Grice, but entered a not guilty plea to the murder charge. Prosecutors presented a case built on forensic evidence, the documented history of police contacts, or his witness testimony confirming Lane's stated intention to harm Grice, and the sequence of events on August 25th. The defense did not offer an alternative explanation that accounted for the physical evidence. The jury found Lane guilty of murder. At sentencing in March 2017, the judge imposed a life sentence with a minimum term of 25 years before Lane would be eligible to apply for parole. In the aftermath, Sussex police referred themselves to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. Multiple officers faced disciplinary proceedings. One officer who had issued the wasting police time penalty was found to have committed misconduct and was told he would have been dismissed had he not already retired. A subsequent inspection by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services found that stalking cases in Sussex were still not being investigated effectively years after the killing. A ban on issuing fixed penalty notices to domestic abuse complainants was introduced in August 2019. Lane remains in custody and will not be eligible for parole consideration before 2042. Number 4. Jodi Ann Arias. On the evening of June 9, 2008, a group of friends forced their way into a residence on East Queensboro Avenue in Mesa, Arizona, after Travis Alexander failed to appear for a scheduled conference call and could not be reached by phone. Officers from the Mesa Police Department arrived at 10:27 that night. What they documented inside the master bathroom indicated Alexander had been dead for approximately 5 days. Yet the investigation that followed would take nearly 5 years to reach a verdict and would become one of the most extensively covered criminal trials in United States history. Jodi Ann Arias was born in 1980 in Salinas, California, and grew up in a family of 5 children. She developed an interest in photography and art in her early adult years, and supported herself through a series of waitressing and service industry jobs while pursuing those interests. colleagues and acquaintances described her as personable and outgoing. She had no prior criminal history and presented publicly as composed and articulate. Travis Victor Alexander was 30 years old at the time of his death, a motivational speaker and legal insurance salesman based in Mesa, Arizona, and a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Whereas the two met in September 2006 at a professional conference in Las Vegas, where Alexander was a featured speaker. Within months, Arias had relocated to Arizona, converted to Alexander's faith, and the relationship had become serious. They entered a formal relationship in February 2007, before separating in June of that year. Following the breakup, Alexander began dating other women. Investigators later documented a pattern of behavior from Arias during this period that Alexander had reported to friends. He told them he believed she was monitoring his movements, going through his personal communications, and accessing his social media and email accounts without permission. A burglary was reported at Arias's grandparents' home in Eureka, California, in late May 2008, in which a .25 caliber handgun was among the items reported stolen. The prosecutors later alleged at trial that Arias had staged this incident herself. In early June 2008, Alexander had made arrangements to travel to Cancun, Mexico, with another woman. On June 4th, 2008, Arias drove from California to Mesa, a journey of approximately 11 hours, and arrived at Alexander's home. Recovered photographs from a digital camera found at the scene, with timestamps placing them at 1:40 in the afternoon on June 4th, documented Alexander alive in his bathroom. Additional images recovered from the same device, timestamped minutes later, showed the bathroom in a state consistent with a violent struggle. In the 5 days between June 4th and the discovery of his body on June 9th, Arias left multiple voicemail messages on Alexander's phone, contacted mutual acquaintances expressing concern about his silence, and drove to Utah, where she began a new romantic relationship with another man. Mesa detectives identified Arias as the last known person to have had contact with Alexander almost immediately. Forensic analysis of the crime scene located a bloody palm print on the hallway wall that was matched to Arias. DNA recovered from the scene confirmed her presence. The digital camera, which had been placed inside a running washing machine, was recovered, and the deleted memory card was processed by the Mesa Crime Laboratory. Technicians successfully retrieved the time-stamped photographs, which placed Arias at the scene on the day of the killing. Arias was arrested on July 15, 2008, at her grandparents' home in California and extradited to Arizona. She was indicted on first-degree murder charges on July 9, 2008. During initial questioning, Arias denied any involvement in Alexander's death and claimed 2 masked intruders had committed the killing and allowed her to leave. That account was not supported by any physical evidence. She later changed her account, acknowledging she had been present, but claiming she had acted in self-defense after Alexander became physically aggressive toward her. Trial proceedings began in January 2013 at Maricopa County Superior Court. The case attracted exceptional public attention and was broadcast live, drawing national and international audiences. Prosecutors presented the physical evidence, the recovered photographs, the DNA findings, and testimony from Alexander's friends describing the pattern of obsessive behavior they had witnessed following the breakup. and the state argued the killing was premeditated and driven by jealousy after Alexander rejected any prospect of resuming the relationship and planned to travel to Cancun with another woman. The defense placed Arias on the witness stand for 18 consecutive days, during which she maintained her self-defense account and alleged a history of abuse by Alexander. Prosecutors challenged her testimony extensively. Forensic expert testimony addressed the sequence and nature of Alexander's injuries, which the state argued was inconsistent with a defensive act. On May 8, 2013, the jury found Arias guilty of first-degree murder. The penalty phase proceeded to a sentencing determination. Two separate juries were unable to reach a unanimous decision on whether to impose the death penalty, resulting in successive mistrials on sentencing. With capital punishment removed from consideration, the matter was returned to the trial judge. On April 13, 2015, Judge Sherry Stevens sentenced Jodi Arias to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Arias was also ordered to pay restitution exceeding $32,000 to Alexander's family. She filed an appeal in 2019 arguing prosecutorial misconduct and prejudicial media coverage had denied her a fair trial. The Arizona Court of Appeals upheld the conviction in March 2020, noting that while certain prosecutorial conduct had been improper, the evidence of guilt was overwhelming and the misconduct had not affected the outcome. Arias remains incarcerated at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville, where she has since been moved from maximum to medium security classification. As of 2026, she has signaled intentions to pursue further post-conviction legal challenges. Number 5. Gurjinder Gary Dhaliwal. Shortly before midnight on September 27, 2011, emergency services received a call reporting a shooting at the parkade of Simon Fraser University's Surrey campus in British Columbia, Canada. Officers and paramedics arrived to find a 19-year-old woman with multiple gunshot and knife wounds. She was transported to hospital, where she died in the early hours of September 28th. The investigation that followed involved surveillance footage, forensic vehicle analysis, and the identification of a second individual who had been deployed to the scene in advance of the attack. Maple Battalia was 19 years old and in her first year of health sciences at SFU Surrey. She had grown up in the Surrey area and was pursuing a concurrent career in acting and modeling alongside her studies, having appeared in several commercial productions. Acquaintances and family described her as driven, warm, and socially connected on campus. Gurjinder Dhaliwal, known to those around him as Gary, was born in approximately 1991 and had known Battalia since secondary school. The two had entered an on-and-off relationship that lasted approximately 4 years, with both families aware of the connection. When Battalia discovered Dhaliwal had been unfaithful to her, she ended the relationship in August 2011. In the weeks that followed, investigators documented a pattern of contact that court records would later describe as obsessive. Following the breakup, Dhaliwal began contacting Battalia from multiple different phone numbers in an effort to circumvent her attempts to cut off communication. Court documents established that he sent her thousands of texts and calls across the weeks between August and late September 2011. On September 24th, Dhaliwal confronted Battalia while she was having coffee with a male friend on campus. The encounter ended with him pushing her to the ground. He was arrested that day, and a court-ordered condition was imposed, requiring him to have no further contact with her. 2 days later, on September 26, Dhaliwal rented a white Dodge Charger and drove to the SFU Surrey campus with an acquaintance named Gursamar Bedi. Dhaliwal remained in the vehicle while Bedi entered the campus to locate Battalia and identify whether a specific male friend was present. Bedi reported that Battalia was there, but the other individual was not. The two men left without making contact. On the night of September 27th, they returned to the same campus. Dhaliwal again waited in the parkade, while Bedi went inside. This time, Bedi located Battalia in the company of the male friend and reported back. Dhaliwal armed himself and waited. As Battalia approached her vehicle on the third level of the parkade following a study session, Dhaliwal intercepted her and discharged 5 shots. 3 rounds struck her in the torso and arm. He then produced a knife and inflicted 11 wounds to her head before leaving the scene. The knife was left at the scene. The firearm was never recovered. Investigators from the Surrey RCMP identified the rented Dodge Charger through surveillance footage within 48 hours of the shooting. When the vehicle was processed, a spent shell casing was recovered from beneath the hood. Forensic comparison confirmed it matched casings recovered at the scene. Battalia's blood was identified on the driver's side visor and headlight control panel of the vehicle. Cell tower records and digital communications data corroborated the pattern of contact in the weeks prior and placed Dhaliwal in the vicinity on the night in question. Bedi's role as an advance scout was established through his own subsequent statements and the CCTV records, showing him entering and exiting the campus building on both September 26th and September 27th. Both men were taken into custody. Dhaliwal was charged with first-degree murder. Bedi faced separate proceedings related to his participation in the planning stages of the attack. Proceedings against Dhaliwal commenced at British Columbia Supreme Court in New Westminster in March 2016. On the opening day of the trial, March 3, 2016, Dhaliwal entered a guilty plea to the reduced charge of second-degree murder, and an agreed statement of facts was read into the record by Crown Prosecutor Wendy Stephen. The statement confirmed Dhaliwal had acted out of jealousy following the breakup and described the use of Bedi as a surveillance accomplice to locate Battalia and report on her movements in real time before the attack. Battalia's father and sister delivered statements to the court at the sentencing hearing on March 7th. Justice Terry Schultz sentenced Gurjinder Dhaliwal to life in prison with no eligibility to apply for parole for 21 years, in accordance with a joint submission from Crown and Defense. When the sentence also included a lifetime weapons ban and a requirement to provide a DNA sample. Crown Prosecutor Wendy Stephen, speaking outside court, described the escalation from harassment to homicide as a pattern the justice system must treat with the utmost seriousness, noting that intimate partner violence in a domestic context was among the aggravating factors considered. Dhaliwal will not be eligible to apply for parole until 2032 at the earliest. As of 2026, no appeal of his conviction or sentence has been recorded. Number 6. Paul Jason Sultana. On the afternoon of January 18, 2023, police were called to a residential apartment in the western Sydney suburb of Penrith, New South Wales, following a welfare check. Officers discovered the body of a 28-year-old woman inside the unit. A neighbor had already reported hearing an altercation from the apartment earlier that day and had observed a man leaving the building carrying a bag shortly afterward. The vehicle registered to the deceased was missing, What investigators documented at the scene and what would be established over 2 years of proceedings pointed to a killing that had been planned before it was carried out. Dana Isaac was 28 years old at the time of her death and was the mother of 2 children. She had grown up in the Western Sydney area and was described by family and friends as warm, devoted to her children, and central to those around her. Her father, Gary English, later told the court she had been his princess. When Paul Jason Sultana was 34 years old at the time of the offense and had known Isaac for a number of years as a friend before the relationship became more intimate in the period leading up to January 2023. Sultana had an established prior criminal history, having accrued convictions for violent offenses from 2016 onward, and served significant periods of incarceration in the intervening years. Court records established that the relationship between Sultana and Isaac was short and unsettled, and that Isaac did not want a long-term commitment. Her father had directly communicated this to Sultana in conversation, telling him that his daughter considered the relationship a friendship only. Sultana's response to that conversation, according to the victim's father's evidence, was to insist that Isaac needed to be told he was suitable for her. On January 17th, 2023, the day before the murder, Sultana moved personal belongings into Isaac's apartment without her agreement. On the morning of January 18th, Sultana cycled to her apartment, carrying red rope and tape, items recovered or identified through the subsequent investigation as having been brought to the scene deliberately. A neighbor later reported hearing the sounds of a physical altercation from inside the unit. Following the altercation, the same neighbor observed a man leaving the flat carrying a bag. Isaac's body was found by police later that afternoon. A forensic examination determined she had been strangled using 2 electrical cords. Post-mortem analysis also identified injuries consistent with a physical assault prior to the strangulation. And forensic testing detected Sultana's DNA at the scene. After leaving the apartment, Sultana contacted his brother by text, indicating he expected to be arrested. He also attempted to contact a friend and a male relative seeking assistance before telephoning his mother, Janet Siliris, who lived nearby. Sultana collected Siliris in Isaac's vehicle and drove her to the apartment. Upon entering and seeing Isaac's condition, Siliris immediately left the scene. Sultana then drove the RAV4 to a remote bushland location and set it alight, destroying the vehicle. Siliris reported what she had witnessed to police. Sultana was arrested and placed on remand the following day. Investigators from New South Wales Police established the sequence of events through mobile phone records, Sultana's own communications in custody, and the testimony of his mother. Forensic analysis confirmed the presence of Isaac's blood on the headlight controls and interior surfaces of the burned vehicle. During his time on remand, Sultana made statements to a fellow inmate describing his actions and his intentions. Those statements were used as evidence at trial. A neighbor's account of the altercation, the timeline established through phone data, and the physical forensics collectively formed the prosecution's case. The trial was heard before Justice Peter Garling in the New South Wales Supreme Court in 2025. Sultana pleaded not guilty and maintained throughout the proceedings that he had been asleep on the couch at the time of Isaac's death and that an unknown third party was responsible. As the defense argued, his subsequent behavior reflected panic, following an unexplained discovery rather than consciousness of guilt. Justice Garling, sitting without a jury, rejected that account entirely, finding it inconsistent with the physical evidence, the forensic findings, the testimony of Sultana's own mother, and the statement Sultana had made in custody. On September 26, 2025, Justice Garling delivered a guilty verdict. Upon hearing the decision, Sultana used a sharp implement to injure his own arm in the courtroom and was removed by paramedics on a stretcher before being transported to hospital. The verdict was delivered in front of Isaac's family, including her father. Justice Garling sentenced Paul Jason Sultana on December 19, 2025, to a maximum term of 44 years imprisonment with a non-parole period of 33 years. Parole eligibility is set for January 2056. The judge identified multiple aggravating factors, including the premeditated nature of the killing, the sustained nature of the assault, the conduct toward Isaac's body following her death, and the destruction of evidence. Justice Garling described intimate partner violence as a scourge in civilized society, and stated that Sultana's conduct required complete denunciation. Sultana's prior violent convictions were also noted as a factor in the severity of the sentence. No appeal has been lodged as of the time of writing. Number 7. Tanaka Zivanai. At approximately 1:45 in the morning on August 27, 2024, police were called to the junction of Paul Street and Tarrington Road in the Treadworth area of Gloucester, following reports from members of the public that a man had attacked a woman in the street. Officers from Gloucestershire Constabulary arrived to find both individuals at the scene. Despite the immediate response of emergency services, Zanel Sabanda was pronounced dead at the location. A post-mortem examination confirmed she had sustained multiple stab wounds to the head, throat, body, and arms. The man who carried out the attack had not fled. He was arrested at the scene. Zanel Sabanda was 28 years old and had emigrated to the United Kingdom from South Africa, where her family remained. She worked as a care worker and was the mother of 2 children, aged 2 and 9 at the time of her death. Colleagues and friends described her as consistently warm and positive. Tanaka Zivanai was 32 years old and had been born in Zimbabwe. He and Sabanda had met through their shared employment as care workers and entered a relationship. The couple lived together at a flat on Dora Walk in Treadworth, located close to the street where Sabanda was killed. Witnesses who knew the couple from the neighborhood told investigators that the relationship had been marked by a pattern of controlling and volatile behavior from Zivanai, with arguments frequently audible from the flat and Sabanda heard in distress on multiple occasions. One neighbor had become concerned enough about Sabanda's safety to provide her with the contact details of a domestic abuse support service. In the week before the murder, Sabanda had asked a male colleague who gave her lifts home from work to drop her off several streets away from the flat on 2 occasions. She did not explain why, but the colleague understood she did not want Zivanai to see her arriving in a vehicle with another man. On the evening of August 26th, Sabanda visited a friend's home after work. While she was there, Zivanai contacted her repeatedly by phone and video call. During one of those calls, conducted on speakerphone, Zivanai saw that a man was present in the room and demanded she return home immediately. Her friends encouraged her to stay the night. She declined, telling them she was accustomed to this behavior and that he would settle down once she was home. On her way back, Zivanai called again with a direct verbal threat. A dispute about Zivanai's immigration status had also developed earlier that evening, with Sabanda's brother witnessing an argument in which Zivanai accused Sabanda of planning to have him removed from the country. CCTV footage captured Zivanai at approximately 11:40 in the evening, carrying a bottle of alcohol, shouting on his phone in the street. In the hours that followed, the couple were captured on camera repeatedly entering and exiting the flat. Zivanai had returned home, retrieved a knife, and gone back into the street. Multiple witnesses in the immediate area observed the attack. One described seeing Zivanai positioned over Sabanda and continuing to stab her. Another saw him covering her mouth. His brother, who witnessed part of the incident, later confirmed to investigators that an argument had been ongoing about a visa dispute, and Sabanda's expressed intention to have Zivanai return to his country of origin. Officers found both individuals at the scene upon arrival, with Zivanai covered in blood and self-inflicted wounds, consistent with the knife recovered nearby. Sabanda was treated by paramedics, but her injuries were not survivable. The investigation was conducted by the Gloucestershire Major Crime Investigation Team. CCTV footage from the surrounding area, witness accounts from multiple bystanders, and the physical evidence at the scene established an unambiguous account of the events. Zivanai was charged with murder and possession of a bladed article in a public place the day after the killing. Proceedings were heard at Bristol Crown Court. On November 27, 2024, Zivanai appeared via video link from custody and entered guilty pleas to both charges. The sentencing hearing took place on January 23, 2025. Prosecuting counsel Robin Shellard outlined the pattern of controlling behavior in the relationship and the sequence of events on the night of the killing, characterizing the attack as the culmination of hours of accusations of infidelity and a dispute over Zivanai's immigration status. The prosecution's position was that investigators suspected Zivanai had perceived a threat to his right to remain in the United Kingdom, and that this had been a contributing factor in the escalation to violence. The defense submitted that Zivanai had lost control of himself in the immediate circumstances, though not in the legal sense of a partial defense, and that he expressed genuine remorse. Judge William Hart sentenced Tanaka Zivanai to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years and 10 months before any consideration for parole. A concurrent 2-year sentence was imposed for the bladed article offense. Sabanda's sister, Nonkanyiso Chuma, attended the sentencing having traveled to the United Kingdom for the first time, having anticipated that her first visit would be for her sister's graduation. She stated outside court that Sabanda's 2 children would grow up without their mother, and that the sentence, while appropriate, could not restore what had been taken. Detective Chief Inspector Wayne Usher described Zivanai as an extremely controlling and dangerous individual, and noted the significant impact the public nature of the killing had on the witnesses present and the wider community. Zivanai will not be eligible for parole consideration until 2045 at the earliest. Number 8. Chance Donahoe. At 6:05 in the morning on August 29, 2023, Columbus police received a radio dispatch reporting a welfare concern at a residence on Berkeley Road in the Deschler Park neighborhood of southeast Columbus, Ohio. Officers arrived at 6:18 and discovered 29-year-old Shannon Hyatt deceased inside the property. She had sustained multiple stab wounds to her upper body and a wound to her throat. Approximately 1 hour later, the Powell Police Department received a call from a man at a Sheetz service station in Liberty Township who stated he had killed his former girlfriend and was prepared to surrender. The two calls, separated by 20 miles and 60 minutes, brought investigators to a case they would characterize as a premeditated act carried out in direct response to the end of a relationship. Shannon Hyatt was 29 years old and lived in the Deschler Park area of Columbus. Those who knew her described her as someone who embraced life, was devoted to the people around her, and left a clear impression on everyone she met. Chance Donahoe was 27 years old at the time of the offense and resided in Powell, a suburb located north of Columbus in Delaware County. He and Hyatt had been in a relationship that had recently ended. In the period following the breakup, Hyatt had made comments about Donahoe on social media that he later told investigators had upset him. Investigators and prosecutors established that the breakup itself and Donahoe's refusal to accept it formed the foundation of what followed on the night of August 28th. On the evening of August 28th, 2023, Donahoe drove past Hyatt's residence on Berkeley Road and observed a vehicle outside that did not belong to her. Prosecutors outlined at sentencing that upon seeing the unfamiliar car, Donahoe returned home, changed into all black clothing, retrieved a knife, and drove more than 20 miles back to Hyatt's address. He forced his way into the residence and stabbed her multiple times. After leaving the scene, Donahoe drove to his mother's home in Powell, where he left the murder weapon. He then proceeded to the Sheetz service station in Liberty Township, where he placed a call to emergency services, identified himself, stated what he had done, and waited to be taken into custody. He was arrested without incident. During the subsequent police interview, Donahoe confirmed he had carried out the killing, citing the breakup and his reaction to seeing the vehicle outside her home as the context for his actions. He also referenced the social media comments Hyatt had made about him following the separation. The Columbus Division of Police and the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office built the evidentiary record around Donahoe's own admission, the physical evidence at the scene, the recovery of the weapon from his mother's address, cell tower data confirming his movements on the night, and the sequence of calls to emergency services. The original indictment filed by Franklin County prosecutors included 2 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of murder, aggravated burglary, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In the abuse of a corpse charge related to the conduct toward Hyatt following the stabbing. The tampering charge reflected the disposal of the weapon at a separate location. Proceedings were heard in Franklin County Court of Common Pleas before Judge Kim Brown. In July 2024, Donahoe entered a guilty plea to 1 count of aggravated murder and 1 count of abuse of a corpse. The remaining charges were dismissed as part of the plea agreement. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for August 8, 2024. A significant number of Hyatt's family members and friends attended the hearing. Assistant Franklin County Prosecutor Dan Lenert addressed the court, describing the deliberate nature of Donahoe's conduct on the night of the killing, the decision to return home, change his clothing, arm himself, and drive back over 20 miles to force entry into Hyatt's home. The prosecution characterized the sequence of events as evidence of considered purposeful intent rather than impulsive action. The defense submitted a sentencing memorandum requesting a sentence that included the possibility of parole, acknowledging that any parole opportunity would be remote given the nature of the offense. Judge Kim Brown sentenced Chance Donahoe to life in prison with a minimum term of 31 years before any possibility of parole consideration. An additional concurrent term was imposed for the abuse of a corpse charge. Donahoe will not be eligible to appear before the Ohio Parole Board until at minimum 2054. As of 2026, no appeal of the conviction or sentence has been recorded. The Shannon Hyatt's family continue to advocate publicly for awareness around intimate partner violence, having spoken at length during the sentencing hearing about her character and the lasting impact of her death on those who loved her. Number 9. Rohit Deepak Singh. In the early hours of November 12, 2017, a woman called her parents from her home on Mach Road in Manarewa, South Auckland, and told them she was afraid. When her parents arrived at the house approximately 16 minutes later, they found their daughter lying on the bedroom floor. Arish Machand was 24 years old and had been fatally stabbed. Officers from the New Zealand police arrived and secured the scene. The investigation that followed uncovered a pattern of obsessive behavior that had been building for more than a year. A false alibi constructed within hours of the killing, and forensic evidence that directly contradicted the account the perpetrator would maintain all the way through trial. Arish Machand was 24 years old, a qualified child educator, and the mother of a 3-year-old daughter. She had been born and educated in Fiji before emigrating to New Zealand, where her parents and sister also lived. Rohit Deepak Singh was in his early 40s, also originally from Fiji, and a divorcee with limited social connections in New Zealand. The two had met in early 2016 when Chand, whose own marriage had broken down, moved into Singh's home. The relationship was brief. By August 2016, Chand had ended it. Singh did not accept that the relationship was over. In the 15 months between the breakup and the killing, these investigators documented an extensive pattern of escalating behavior. Singh sent Chand threatening messages on Facebook, called and texted her daily from multiple contacts, followed her in public and photographed her without her knowledge, and shared with a friend his stated intention to kill her. He had a photographic image of her face tattooed onto his chest. Messages recovered from his phone included communications in which he told her he spoke to a photograph of her on his wall every day. Chand had returned home from a friend's birthday celebration in the early hours of November 12th, arriving with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend left the property at approximately 12:45 in the morning. Chand called her parents shortly afterward to tell them she was frightened. Singh had been watching the house from a vehicle parked nearby. His cell phone polling data placed him in the immediate vicinity at the time. He broke into the property wearing gloves and carrying a large kitchen knife he had obtained in advance. The attack was over within minutes. Chand was stabbed in the back, shoulder, and arm, struck to the back of the head, and had her face and groin lacerated, with the groin wound severing a vital artery. The murder weapon was never recovered. When her parents arrived at the house, they found their daughter in a pool of blood. Singh had already left. Following the murder, Singh drove to the north shore of Auckland, where he disposed of his clothing, gloves, and the weapons he had used, before placing a call to police at 10:18 the following morning. During the call, he reported that he had been the victim of a robbery carried out by 3 women who had flagged down his vehicle, taken his belongings, and scratched his face. He gave the time of the alleged robbery as approximately 1:30 in the morning. Investigators subjected the account to immediate scrutiny. The scratch marks on Singh's face were swabbed, and the DNA recovered was matched to material found under Arish Machand's fingernails. Cell data placed him near the Make Road address, not on the North Shore, at the time of the killing. The robbery account could not be substantiated in any respect. The trial was conducted at the High Court at Auckland over approximately 4 weeks in November 2018. Singh maintained his innocence throughout. He testified that he had not killed Chand, but had found her wounded and semi-conscious inside the house, and that she had asked him to leave before her father discovered they were together. The Crown presented the cell tower evidence, the DNA findings, the testimony of the friend to whom Singh had disclosed his intentions, the extensive record of obsessive contact in the preceding months, and the documented implausibility of the robbery account. The jury deliberated for approximately 40 minutes before returning a unanimous guilty verdict. Justice Grant Powell sentenced Rohit Deepak Singh to life imprisonment on February 14, 2019, with a minimum non-parole period of 19 years. In his remarks, Justice Powell described the murder as calculated, brutal, and callous, and declined to apply any discount for remorse, given that Singh had demonstrated none. The aggravating factors identified included Singh's unlawful entry into the home, and the severity and nature of the attack, and his post-offense conduct in constructing and maintaining a false account. Singh subsequently appealed his sentence to the Court of Appeal, arguing the 19-year minimum was excessive and that post-offense conduct had been improperly used as an aggravating factor in calculation. In September 2020, the Court of Appeal dismissed the appeal in full, affirming that even setting aside post-offense conduct, the minimum term was not manifestly excessive given the comparable sentencing in similar cases. The murder weapon has never been found. Singh remains incarcerated and will not be eligible for parole consideration until 2038 at the earliest. Number 10. Daryl Crenshaw. On August 8, 2008, when the family of 22-year-old Ashley Peoples contacted the Hartford Police Department to report her missing. She had last been seen the previous evening getting into a vehicle outside a nail salon on Main Street in Hartford's North End. Officers began tracing her known contacts. A search warrant was executed at an apartment on Church Street in Enfield belonging to a man named Daryl Crenshaw. When officers entered the property on August 10th, they found Peoples' body inside a bedroom. Crenshaw was gone. What followed was a 5-month international fugitive investigation that would ultimately be resolved not by conventional law enforcement methods, but by a television broadcast. Ashley Peoples was 22 years old and worked as a supervisor at a CarMax dealership in Hartford, a position her friends later noted she had earned at an age when most of her peers were still in entry-level roles. She was described as outgoing, capable, and devoted to her younger sisters and godson, who looked to her as a model. Daryl Crenshaw was 25 years old and lived in Bloomfield, Connecticut. He and Peoples had been in a relationship for approximately 2 months before Peoples decided she wanted to end it. Trial testimony established that Crenshaw had been informed by a relative inside the salon on the evening of August 7th that Peoples was present and allegedly flirting with another man. He called her cell phone, then drove to the salon twice. On his second visit, he, a witness in the car park, observed him strike Peoples twice in the face before she got into his vehicle, and it drove away. Peoples had left her cell phone with a friend before entering the car, telling the friend that Crenshaw had a habit of breaking phones. Later that night, a neighbor at Crenshaw's Enfield apartment building observed him carry a woman from his vehicle into the ground floor unit between 2 and 3 in the morning. On the morning of August 8th, as Peoples lay inside the apartment, Crenshaw met another woman and spent the day with her at Six Flags Amusement Park in Agawam, Massachusetts. Witnesses at the park later testified that at one point he became visibly distressed and stated that he could see her face and that she was not breathing, before telling his companion he was not a murderer and was a good person. After returning to Hartford that evening, Crenshaw persuaded a friend to drive him to Meriden. He then left the state entirely. He subsequently crossed into Mexico, where he assumed the alias Josh Bruff and claimed Jamaican nationality when detained by Mexican immigration authorities on a visa violation. The search for Crenshaw by Hartford and Enfield police, in coordination with the United States Marshal Service, had stalled without a confirmed location. In January 2009, the lead investigator on the case, Detective Seth Condon, requested that the television program America's Most Wanted broadcast a segment on the case. The broadcast aired and generated a critical tip. An inmate at a detention facility in Florida who had previously been incarcerated in Mexico recognized Crenshaw from the broadcast as the man he had known as Josh Bruff. He's a fellow detainee at a Mexico City immigration center. The inmate contacted the program, which passed the information to the marshal's office in Hartford. Officers contacted their counterparts in Mexico City, and fingerprint confirmation was obtained within hours. Crenshaw was extradited to the United States and arraigned at Superior Court in Enfield within a week of his identification. Following his return, he gave a statement to detectives in which he acknowledged striking and choking Peoples, claimed he had found her still breathing the following morning before going on his date, and stated that when he returned and she had stopped breathing, he covered her and hoped she would recover. The post-mortem examination established that Peoples had died from blunt trauma to the head and neck, and forensic examination of the apartment recovered blood-stained clothing, a laundry basket, and a bath towel. Peoples' blood was found beneath Crenshaw's fingernails. The trial was conducted at Hartford Superior Court before Judge Julia DeCacco Dewey. Prosecutors argued that Crenshaw had acted deliberately following the confrontation at the salon, and that his conduct in the hours following Peoples' death was consistent with an awareness of guilt. The defense sought a manslaughter rather than murder finding, arguing that Crenshaw had not intended to cause death. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning a guilty verdict on October 6, 2010, convicting Crenshaw of murder, 2 counts of second-degree kidnapping, and third-degree assault. Judge Dewey sentenced Darrell Crenshaw on December 15, 2010, to 78 years in prison. In delivering the sentence, Judge Dewey stated she found no evidence of genuine remorse and described Crenshaw as a cruel and calculating murderer. Peoples' mother, Patricia Baskerville, told reporters outside the courtroom that while no sentence could bring her daughter back, She was certain Peoples would now rest in peace. Crenshaw subsequently filed multiple appeals, including a 2016 challenge claiming inadequate representation at trial. The Connecticut Appellate Court denied that appeal. The Connecticut Supreme Court also considered earlier grounds of appeal, partially reversing one kidnapping count and ordering resentencing. However, the 78-year total was maintained at resentencing in April 2015. As of 2026, Crenshaw remains incarcerated in Connecticut.